Hello, and welcome to this presentation on the Professional Advantage Intelligent Invoice Capture solution. Professional Advantage have been producing fully integrated SunSystems dedicated solutions for many years now, working in areas such as cash management, billing and credit management, and spend control with our iPOS procurement solution. However, we also produce automation solutions that are either integrated or entirely independent to SunSystems. The Professional Advantage IIC solution sits in this area, and at the moment it works against our iPOS solution for capturing and pushing invoices into iPOS. But as we go forward, it will be working directly against other FMS and procurement systems. So, are we all over invoice entry? I think we are. If we imagine entering an invoice into the system, in this case iPOS, we are dealing with a lot of data. We have to look at invoices and understand what fields are there, then interpret them and punch that information into the iPOS entry screen. You can see it's many fields, it's a lot of data. We're just looking at the header screen here, and that gets even bigger when we add invoice lines. So the question is, why would we automate? And how would we automate? Research suggests that invoice volumes are going to be quadrupling in the next 10 years or so. We have a typical cost in the UK, according to Gartner, for entering a manual invoice of between £4 and £25. From an international sense, there is a similar cost in Australian or US dollars. The average cost of processing an automated invoice rather than a manual invoice is 20 times less than that. So there are many reasons why we should be moving in this direction. So why haven't we done it before? The reason for this lies in the technology. Historically, there have been many solutions out there for automating the capture of invoices. They all rely on template-based optical character recognition, or OCR. These systems are positional. They scrape data from the document as it is passed through, and they need to know where particular fields are on the invoice to identify what they mean when they're found. Without knowledge of where on the invoice a particular field or amount would be, the system does not know what it has found in that position. For each supplier, you need to understand how their templates differ. So every time you bring on a new supplier, you need to set up a template and identify the position and field names. However, we're now moving into a period where artificial intelligence is becoming increasingly powerful. There are algorithms and services dedicated to scraping and understanding document data. What we are seeing is that these algorithms are able to identify data fields effectively from an invoice without knowing where to look. So, in understanding what we are looking for, and in learning what they are likely to look like over time, these systems can scan a new, unseen invoice structure and assess where that data may be, making suggestions as to the correct fields and passing it through to an output. This is really powerful. It removes a lot of the manual work in setting up and managing these supplier templates. So while the traditional systems can solve these manual data entry issues, they can actually create more problems. Users are moving their activities towards managing the layouts and the templates instead of entering invoices, but much of the work does not disappear. Whereas, if you look at a cognitive data capture system, an AI-based solution, it's delivering accurate results without that template management. This is a real game changer and why we need to move in this direction. So, if you think about the scale of increasing efficiency and reduced cost on manual entry, at the bottom of that scale you have manual entry, with accounts payable teams using their knowledge to enter the invoice, putting it into the AP system and matching it against orders. This has a high cost, it's high in time and in effort. In the middle, you have your traditional template-based OCR systems, which some of you may have seen in the past working against iPOS or other systems. And then at the top of the scale, you have your AI-based extraction. That's the highest level of accuracy. It's the highest level of zero-touch entry and faster onboarding, and this is where you are in terms of an IIC solution. It is also worth mentioning the use of robotic process automation, or RPA, as a possible solution. This is becoming more popular and it relies on developing and setting up automated bots that learn a precise process as it is carried out by a user, adding in custom lookup tables and developing logic to mimic the human decisions. RPA systems are again limited by template-based processing. Each bot is set up to take on processing a set piece of information. In this scenario, the invoice for a particular supplier. They can take a great deal of time and effort to set up and are costly. In some cases, a small implementation project in itself to deal with only a few suppliers. They're good at complex requirements at small volumes, but they are poor value and very expensive for high volume usage. So, if you think about a traditional OCR system or an RPA system, 50% of tasks could be automated. With RPA, maybe you would automate many more, but complex tasks. But if you're looking at 80 to 90% of tasks being automated with AI, this is a better solution. So I think that offers quite a big difference. If you had to deal with 50% of your invoices manually, or deal with 25% at a low cost, I think I know where I'd go. So, the invoice data set. What do we need to capture in an invoice when it gets passed through to us? First of all, we have our header data. And going back to the same screen here as before, we can see important information such as the supplier invoice number, we have the invoice amount, the total amount, the date, etc. But there are some key coding elements that will not be on the invoice itself. Data like the supplier code used within your ERP system. That's not going to be on the invoice, but we could, if we were clever, map that in there for you using systems logic and the mapping of data from the ERP if you have a good understanding of this. If we look at the line entry, we are capturing things like the description from the invoice, quantities, amounts. The tax code, however, for example, won't be on an invoice itself, but we may understand something about the tax rate. So there are extra things we can do than just scraping data. We need to be thinking about how we can best apply logic and our knowledge of invoices to form a complete invoice for entry. It's the ability to contextualize and add metadata and deal with this effectively that increases the quality delivered as part of the solution. So the challenges of OCR is to scrape the invoice. But here we were looking at a dummy invoice. We're looking at field positions and they all vary. We don't know where they are going to be unless we've seen it before. So we may have an order number here, we may have it down at the bottom. It may be up there or perhaps even on the line. There are many different places it could be. We may have inconsistent field names. So we can see a description here on this invoice, or maybe there's another reference, or maybe a PO number, maybe called customer PO number. They can vary with each invoice. Identifying these is something that AI is actually quite good at doing, as it learns over time from many invoices across many customers. It has the ability to deal with many different styles, so any type of invoice that comes through within reason, we're able to use and understand without having to train on that particular supplier layout. We have data that may or may not be present. So perhaps there's no PO number. What do we do? How do we identify a supplier? As I said, it won't be on the invoice itself. So what data could be used? Perhaps we could use the VAT number as a reference. That could be a good idea, and it is what we're doing. It is dealing with these elements which make it a real challenge. So if we look at the process of using PA Intelligent Invoice Capture, we're looking to receive supplier invoices sent to the company by having them pushed to a specific email address that we provide as part of the service. You could send invoices to the address yourself or have your suppliers send them directly. Once that email comes through, our cloud-based engine will take the attachment and scrape the data from the invoice using the AI algorithm to understand the data, like a human, looking at the invoice and saying, okay, which fields are which and what do I do with them? We then apply business rules to work out the correct supplier code by identifying the VAT number on the invoice and looking for a corresponding match in the SunSystems supplier record. This allows us to pre-code the correct supplier account code into the invoice when we push it to the system. We also do similar checks with the PO number. Having identified a PO number on the invoice and knowing what supplier code we're looking at, we then see if there is a corresponding PO number in the iPOS area for that supplier, giving a high level of confidence that we're going to be pushing a matchable purchase order through to iPOS. If there is no PO number on the scanned document, we know it is likely to be a direct invoice, and it's going to be a direct invoice that we pass to iPOS with the correct coding for this. Once we have all the data, we produce an invoice in an XML format and drop it into the iPOS environment where it gets imported using standard functionality. iPOS will then attempt to match it against an existing PO if it is an invoice with a PO number, and where it is a direct invoice, it will be imported and sent into the iPOS approval workflow, routed to a defined coding group for the addition of analysis and account codes, cost centers, etc. If these are added, iPOS then reroutes the invoice to the correct managers for approval. For purchase order based invoice, the coding is inherited from the PO document in iPOS as part of the matching process, and therefore we don't need to code these in the approval routing. Any invoices that cannot be scanned or have critically missing data will be routed to an alert email sent to the accounts team for manual action. Invoices that cannot be matched in iPOS for some reason against an order can be seen in the iPOS XML Import queue and be dealt with by the AP team through rematching. To provide this process, we are utilising a partner organisation to provide the AI algorithm in the cloud with great experience in the area of invoice management, and coupling this with our own PA solution using PA Streams, which is a very capable event-based integration and process management tool to apply business logic and to pass the invoices into the procurement system. In fact, PA Streams as an independent solution is great for all sorts of integration and event-based alerting. Since we can manage many different endpoints with PA Streams, we could of course optionally push data out to other systems by making some changes to the stream. So if you needed to push an invoice document into, say, MS SharePoint, or if you needed to have an invoice created in another line of business system as part of the process, that could be perfectly possible as a customized deployment. So the bulk of the architecture is cloud-based. It has a component that sits locally within your environment, talking to your local SunSystems and iPOS servers. You or your suppliers send your invoices through to the email address we provide in the PA IIC cloud service, and where the invoice document is then detached from the email and it's delivered to the AI algorithm, which performs all the data scraping and sends the results back to the PA IIC service. We then make any queries we need to against your SunSystems iPOS server through a secure connection to the local host. And this is the only component, by the way, running locally in your actual environment as part of the implementation. It's responsible for running the communications between our cloud service and any local queries into the SunSystems server as well. Once these queries have been carried out, the system will then drop the invoice back into the iPOS system on-premise, and off we go inside your environment. So we're talking about a hybrid solution with PAIIC main processes occurring in the cloud, along with some local processes running in your environment. Obviously, talking securely, and industry standard protocols are used all the time. We can be discussing more of this with your technical team as required. Let's have a look at the process in action. So here I have an email. It's been addressed to our demonstration queue in the PAIIC stream, and down below we have an attached invoice document from the supplier European Software Specialists. There's also a brief message from the Accounts Payable team at the supplier. So what we're going to do is to send this invoice through to the queue and have it processed by IC and off to iPOS. If we have a look at the invoice itself, we can see it's just a dummy document, of course. It's been made up for European Software Specialists. We can see that it has certain key information, things like the invoice number, which is obviously important, the terms and conditions, purchase order number in this case, and then down below we also have some line data. In this case it's just a single line containing the description, quantity and cost. However, it could be multiple lines, and we could have a tax amount on the line as well. These things are all possibly picked up within the stream. At the bottom of the invoice we have our VAT number. That's obviously very important because we're going to use it to identify the supplier from within SunSystems and code the invoice correctly. And this is the invoice that we're going to send through to our stream. So I'm going to close the invoice and then we're going to send this email off and see what happens. As a result of passing the invoice, the PA Streams IRC model creates an XML import file on your local iPOS import directory. So here you can see that we're looking at the iPOS standard import directory, and I've dropped this into Andrew Testing to show you the file at the moment, but this is in effect the XML file that it will create. So we go and open that file. Just going to open it with my XML notepad. We'll see that it created an invoice in the standard invoice schema for the import of this data into iPOS. So you can see that it's picking up here the supplier code. That's come from our query against the local SunSystems environment using the VAT number from the invoice. We can see the invoice totals, the conversion. Here we have the attachment, which is passed through automatically from the SIFT environment. So we will see the attachment in iPOS. And then moving down, we can see here obviously the detail around the invoice line detail. Here what we've done is, because this is a direct invoice with no purchase order number, we've actually in our schema passed it to a defined purchase account code, and this will be used to route it for approval to an encoder within the iPOS environment who will be responsible for adding the analysis coding and the P&L coding, because being a non-PO invoice it does require some coding, but that is actually utilizing standard iPOS functionality for approval routing, workflow and coding. So we can pass that very easily through a single line that's added to the iPOS approval matrix to ensure that it gets coded correctly, and then it can be passed on through the rest of the matrix as usual for approval at the financial level. So that's our iPOS file. So if we close that, what I'm actually going to do in this case is copy the file and drop it into the iPOS import directory, and obviously this would normally be the direct path for that coming from IIC. In this case I wanted to show you the file output. So I'm just going to paste it in, and you'll see that that then sits there and is picked up by the iPOS service and disappears. And that's now been imported into the XML queue for iPOS. If it was an iPOS order-based invoice, then it would attempt to match that from the XML queue against an order. If it was within tolerance, it would pass through, maybe needing approval, maybe not, if it found a requisite match on order number and value. If it is a non-order number based invoice, it will be passed directly into the approval queue for coding. So if we then go and jump into iPOS, you can see that this invoice has now appeared in the invoice view. It's come in and it's picked up the supplier invoice number, the supplier code, etc., the values, and it's been passed directly to submitted, and that is because it's a direct invoice and it's using the iPOS approval routing for that coding function, as I just mentioned. So we have a look at the invoice itself. Obviously we have detail that needs to be entered at the header level, and we have line detail. So if we look at the header level here, we've picked up the supplier code based on that reference from the VAT number on the invoice. We've got the total value, we've got the supplier invoice number, and all that sort of standard information that has been populated from XML and also defaulted from iPOS itself where required. And then if we go down, we have the line detail coming in with the values, etc. And it's passed it directly to an approval group within the system, and that is because it was coded with that particular PAD IMV01 dummy account, and this is the way that we would pass things for approval within the system. So if you imagine that this is now a standard invoice going through, really that has been purely touchless from the point of email through to the point of this invoice being sent for approval. And approval being coding within iPOS, we really are looking at a touchless process. If that had been a purchase order based invoice, if we were to look at the XML invoice queue, we have invoices here that have been coming in through XML. This is where we go to check those invoices and try and match them against orders. So if we were looking at a process whereby we bought in an invoice and we needed to then match it against a purchase order, the system would try and match based on match rules within the iPOS XML environment. So if it was matched on purchase order number, the values were correct, and a purchase order number had been passed in from the XML, which would have been scraped from the invoice, then this would potentially not be in the queue. It could be passed on for approval based on it being over tolerance, under tolerance, or just general approval requirement, but already matched to the purchase order, and all the coding would have been done based on the purchase order detail. If not, then it would have appeared in this queue, and from here we are able to then go and attempt to match the invoice. So we could actually pick a line, go and attempt to match it, choose our order detail, and once we'd found that detail, match it. So this would be the standard sort of matching process that you would undergo when you put an invoice into iPOS in a manual fashion. However, you'd be doing it from the XML queue, and that number of individual manual matches that you'll be carrying out should be significantly reduced, because obviously we're doing the automatic matching for invoices that have that order number on it. So that's really our process within the iPOS environment. Anyone using iPOS would be entirely used to this sort of environment in terms of being able to view invoices, manage invoices, work with the approvals. The key point is that we are able to bring the data into the system entirely automatically from the environment. However, obviously there could be errors, and this is part of the other benefit of the IRC environment. So where we have invoices that cannot be read for some reason, maybe there is data missing on that invoice, or it just logically doesn't make sense, we're able to email to find people within your AP team or administrator that we can set up for you with those errors, and the invoice itself would then be sent to them as part of that email. So here's an invoice, there was a problem with it, this was the problem, and then you could proceed to do manual entry for that. So we very much cover the non-happy day scenario as well as that perfect route through the system. So thank you very much for listening today. I hope that was useful in terms of showing you the standard sort of process to get an invoice into iPOS through the environment. Obviously there's actually not much to see because it is pretty much touchless. But if you do have any queries or questions that you would like to go through in relation to the process, the benefits, how it could work for you, any config options, then please do contact us at info_uk@professionaladvantage.co.uk, or have a look at our website www.professionaladvantage.co.uk If you're looking at the Australasia region, then obviously the same information is available on our Australian website, www.professionaladvantage.com.au.